All right, guys, we are talking about the Acolyte today.
I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting episode, and our podcast episodes still don't get quite as much traction as our shorts do. We'll see what the feedback is like for this. I feel like we landed pretty accurately and pretty similarly between the two of us, as we'll go over as we go through the episode today.
Yeah.
But I know that the Acolyte got some serious hate online. It was not received well.
And some of it, I feel like, was undeserved. And then there are other points where I was like, guys, I can't defend this. Come on.
Agreed.
Okay, opening question. If you had one wish to spend on creating a dream Star Wars game, what would it be?
Ooh, so you know I'm a big commando head, so I would love to see like a Republic commando, but like in the style of Gears of War.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Big campaign, lots of storyline play, PvP available, PvE mode as well. Bring back the commandos, give us like different campaigns to fight across, and also like different squads as well. Like it doesn't need to be Delta Squad. It could be with all the different squads. We could see like what happened to, I think it's Gregor's squad, or what's the yellow commando with all the tick marks in him?
That's Gregor.
Yeah, that's Gregor. Okay. So like see what happened to him and his squad. I think it would be fun to play across many campaigns in the Clone Wars and then even eventually fight into the Galactic Civil War, because all the remaining commandos became Imperial commandos. And I think that would be really fun. I also think a horde mode against droids, rebels, and like other aliens would be awesome.
Yeah, that is a recipe for success right there. That's perfect. I love that so much.
I want it to happen.
In the similar vein of calling back to an old video game that we both really like, my dream Star Wars game would be a true Star Wars Galactic Conquest game, a la the original Battlefront 2, and specifically with 3 distinct modes in this Galactic Conquest style game. It would have like a PvE mode similar to Helldivers, where the entire community gets to conquer the galaxy as either the Rebels, the Galactic Republic, or the Old Republic. Maybe they put it into seasons. It's like, okay, this season you're fighting this war, this season you're fighting this war, so on and so forth. The second mode would be a single-player mode where people can set up their own servers and conquer the galaxy as any faction. The third mode would actually be a competitive tournament-style gameplay where teams of up to 16 to 32 players could sit down for an extended period of time and go head-to-head. I'm talking like, it's like, hey, you guys have 3 hours. Who's gonna conquer the galaxy?
Or maybe who gets like the larger percentage of the galaxy?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Honest to goodness, I would be so thrilled, even at the bare minimum, with just a Helldivers clone within the Star Wars IP. I think that would be a game changer.
Big asterisks, also available on Xbox.
Also available on Xbox. Yeah, not just a Sony and PC. Put it on Xbox, come on! But if it was Star Wars, it would be on Xbox as well.
Yes, absolutely. All right, guys, let's get started. We're going to start off with some data. So things we want you guys to keep in mind as we make these reviews is that movie reviews and TV show reviews involve taking heaps and heaps of subjective responses in order to get an objective score for a movie, right? It's not a perfect science, but that is what it is. Like any other kind of survey or poll, these types of ratings are prone to bias, which, like it or not, review bombing is a type of bias because it is an audience that is stoked to action that may not have reported the review otherwise. I know that this is very common, especially in like the restaurant world as well. You may pass on a good restaurant review as like word of mouth. You may tell your coworkers, oh, I really loved this place. They had really good pizza. The server was really nice, yada, yada, yada. However, if you had a bad restaurant review, you're more likely, this is my subjective opinion, but I feel like I would be more likely to post a bad review because I would be like, hey, I don't want others to experience this. And I would post a review. So that happens a lot with video games, movies, TV shows. So keep in mind that that's kind of the bias that I think the Acolyte got hit with a little bit. I love stats and biases and things like that, just with data integrity. I think that's really fun. I actually talk about this kind of stuff at work all the time, especially when we are doing research with the men and women that we serve with. So it's quite fun.
Yeah. That's the good stuff. Data integrity.
Give me that standard deviation, baby.
Oh my gosh, you have a small standard deviation? Oh my gosh. Okay, so Rotten Tomatoes gave The Acolyte 81% with an audience score of 17%. A huge discrepancy. IMDb had a similar situation where fans, or rioters, it's unclear, gave The Acolyte a 3.9 out of 10. Overall, it's pretty fair to say it had not done well. Like we said, this is that bias we had mentioned, and it had tanked the reviews. And because the internet is the way it is, outrage usually wins out. I'm not trying to cast judgment one way or the other. We're just recording our observations. Personally, there's a lot I liked about this show, and other things that popped up that made it really hard to defend. It's not perfect. It had some cool episodes with some cool moments, and others that I feel like skipping if I have to rewatch it again.
With all that in mind, guys, let's start the episode.
Welcome to Talk About Tatooine. I'm Andrew.
I'm Nathan.
And we are twin brothers here to bring you what's new in nerddom, give colorful commentary on our favorite subjects. Welcome to our cantina. Grab a drink and settle in as we set course for realities beyond our own. I'm Nathan. I'm guessing you're drinking coffee?
Oh, yeah. This is like cup number 3 for the day.
Yeah, we're recording on a Saturday morning, so I'm like, yeah, I need coffee. It is a miracle I don't have a headache right now. It's a miracle.
That's fair. All right, guys, we're going to start off with our rating 1 out of 10 as we go through all of our TV show and movie reviews. So, Andrew, would you please start us off with your rating?
I would love to. I'm a simple man. I like bright lights and laser swords, and the combat in The Acolyte, in my opinion, was superb with very few notes. I loved those portions of the show the most. However, I thought there were portions of the actual narrative that I thought were boring, cheesy, or honestly just a little cringe. Do people still say cringe?
The cringe is real, yes.
Great. Taking all of that into account, I can't really give The Acolyte a great score. I would give it a 5.5 out of 10. Some great moments, but I'm not really itching to rewatch it. Or if I am, there's portions of the show where I would love to rewatch and maybe skip some other scenes, similar to how there are parts in the prequels, like in episode 2, anytime Anakin and Padme were alone, those scenes still bother me. I'm like, I think this is weird. You still can't convince me that Natalie Portman's character in The Phantom Menace is supposed to be like 10 years old or 12 years old or whatever. I was like, no, she's an adult talking to a child who she later marries. In my head, it doesn't click and it's weird.
It's very strange.
Those scenes, I'm like, we can skip this. The dialogue is bad. Like, I'm hoping this show kind of has prequel syndrome where in like 10 years, people are going to just absolutely adore it. And they're going to be like, this is the best thing. It's a 10 out of 10. But for right now, people are like, this has some issues. And people were definitely like that with the prequels. Like, people have raised it to a level of godhood almost, even though they have some glaring issues. If you try to watch the prequels sober, it's a little difficult. It's a little difficult. However, there are obviously some awesome moments. Like, remember in episode 2 of the first battle of Geonosis?
Oh, so good.
Blew me away. I was like, the arena scene, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then all the Jedi show up and I'm like, this is amazing. And then the clones show up and my heart nearly stopped as a child. I'm like, this cannot be happening.
The man just had his first nut right there.
Oh no, I have become a man.
Gross.
Hey, you said it first.
I know. I'm here to bring the weird.
Please start talking so I can stop talking.
Excellent. I was waiting for you to stop. So overall, I actually kind of getting that little bit of prequel syndrome ties into my review. So I give this a 6 out of 10 compared to your 5.5. So like average, our scores both very mid. Now keep in mind, if you were to grade this on like a percentage scale, both of those are failing scores, right?
Yes.
You're like, okay, but like a lot of times for me, like 5 is like average. Like, yeah, I'd watch it again. There was some enjoyment there. And then like as you get above 5, it starts to be like, hey, I started to like this. If it's below 5, it's like, hey, I started to hate this. So that's where I was at. Barely over 5. But that's kind of where I want to give the kind of the context of my rating scale. There were some really cool moments, but I would say I need to get some prequel syndrome starting to sit in. My opinions for Star Wars and other shows usually start to settle in as I rewatch them. So I will probably rewatch this in the future, because I think one of the hard things is that I'm watching it like week to week. And a lot of times when you can watch the whole show, you can sometimes appreciate it either a little bit more or even a little bit less. So 6 out of 10 for me, mostly mid, but leaning positive.
On that note, in preparation for writing this, I had on one screen, I was rewatching it. I almost made it all the way through the whole season again in the last day or two while I was writing. And I found that watching the episodes back to back, I did appreciate them more.
It's weird how that works.
I also had headphones on, which made me appreciate the audio more, because I watch everything on my TV in my living room, which I don't have a nice speaker for. So then having the actual audio experience in my headphones, I was like, oh, this is changing the way I feel about this. So audio is a big part.
That's one thing I can give Star Wars to. Yeah, absolutely. Is like Star Wars, I don't think will ever be faulted for its sound effects and musical scores, because it's like some of the best always.
Agreed.
I would say, other than like scores that I think of that are better than Star Wars, very few things come to mind, aka like Lord of the Rings. Very few things I would say have a better, more notable scoring than Star Wars does.
I don't even know that I would say Lord of the Rings has a better score. I would say John Williams' work on Star Wars, and I want to say it was Howard Shore's work on Lord of the Rings, I would say they're about equal, because they're so different and they evoke such different emotions, and they're so bespoke to the works that they're made for, that I'm like, they're both master classes in my opinion.
That's fair. I think one thing the Acolyte did really, really well is we got a lot of lore out of the Acolyte. And so coming into this, we are going to actually talk about a couple of the different lore points. So we're going to talk about a few different things. I'll just give you guys a quick overview of what we are going to talk about. We're going to talk about Children of the Force. We're talking about Force babies. We'll talk about the
Force babies. Oh my god.
We'll talk about the Barash Vow, Cortosis, and we'll talk about Darth Plagueis, Force psychometry, detachable lightsabers and different lightsaber styles, Force witches, lightsaber bleeds, and then we'll finishing off with the Virgins in the Force, and then we'll go into the HoloNet news. So basically, this show was a little bit of a lore treasure trove. I don't think people realize that. I think they gave us a lot of good lore, which people had complaints with. I think one of the biggest complaints actually was our first item, which was Children in the Force. Now, here's where I think knowing a little bit of history of Star Wars does give me a more positive bias. So I'm going to point that out right now. So This isn't the first time we see a Force child, aka Anakin, enter the scene. So we're like, hey, that's cool. So I know a lot of people love the idea of the Immaculate Conception. If you guys don't know what that is, that's the idea that Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary with no help from a human father. So Immaculate Conception. That's essentially how we got Anakin. He's Force Jesus, even though Obi-Wan is obviously Force Jesus, but that's a different story. So
yeah, the Immaculate Conception analogy is pretty heavy-handed.
Oh yeah, super heavy-handed. Basically, Anakin is this like Star Wars messiah gone goth later in life. So nowhere in Star Wars lore do we see that this can only happen once. So, and I want to bring up some of the history and inspiration for Star Wars. So if you guys don't know, Star Wars was heavily inspired by the works of gosh dang it, who is the guy who writes Dune? I forgot his name.
Frank Herbert.
Frank Herbert. So Frank Herbert's Dune was a heavy inspirational source for Star Wars. In Dune, it takes years, generations of purposeful breeding of the Bene Gesserit to create Paul Atreides, essentially, for them to have the perfect offspring, to basically have all of the abilities that is necessary, and to have this like wonderful interaction with Spice where he can then become the Kwisatz Haderach, or basically Sand Messiah. So
indeed,
the idea that we see a coven of witches in Star Wars be able to produce a Force child, I mean, yeah, they're twins, like whatever, that happens. I feel like that's in the realm of possibility. Twins are a little weird, but we'll talk about that later.
Whoops.
So I feel like it's not out of the realm of possibility. And people got really upset about this, that they're like, they can't do this. Only Anakin could do this. And I'm like, there's no rules for saying how Force babies come into being. There's like, we don't have rules for this. You guys just have your pre-existing ideas for what you think the rules are, but like there's no canon that says, oh, this could only happen once. And it's like, yeah, they thought, Anakin was the chosen one, but did he actually bring balance to the Force? That's a whole nother debate that we won't go into today. So,
well, and to kind of build off of that a little bit, accessing kind of my long-term memory here, in the book Darth Plagueis, when Palpatine, I believe, kills Darth Plagueis and basically knocks the Force out of balance, he almost has this like, he senses this like massive echo in the Force around the time that Anakin is conceived. And it's sort of alluded to in that book that like the Force is balancing itself by the conception of Anakin. I mean, that's Legends now. And again, I'm accessing long-term memory because it was like a decade ago that I read this book and I couldn't get it back into my library cart before we filmed this episode.
that's fair.
But like it was kind of like the Force doing its own thing. And like since then, the lore of the Force has changed a lot. Like we have the cosmic Force, we have the living Force, we have the brother, sister, and the father, with the gods of Mortis. Like the lore is expanding.
Yeah, we have the path between worlds. Like we have all these different things. So
the world between worlds. Like
sorry, world between. Excuse me.
Same diff. He said the wrong thing. I'm gonna kill him.
Kill me in the comments, folks. Your comments only fuel my engagement.
They do. They so do. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's the only time I want people to be like mean, being like, as long as you put it in the comments, it's okay. We're going to talk a little bit about this a little bit more in depth too, about lore from like a higher perspective, to just say like, it's going to change. Think of it as like any superhero comic book universe that's created. The lore is constantly changing, characters are constantly dying, and things are constantly being retconned. And that is the level of lore and in-depth and storytelling that movies are slowly coming up to, is things are going to get retconned. I mean, DC is doing it because they keep making sucky movies, but hopefully we'll see Star Wars start to kind of rewrite itself as they truly just try to operate in the pocket of the rule of cool, if that makes sense.
Yes.
We're going to move on to the next thing. The next lore bit we have is something called the Barash Vow. So this is not something I've ever heard of before. It seemed to be introduced in the Acolyte, and it's the vow of silence that Master Torben takes after he, we can kind of read between the lines. There's the really the only word for it is the massacre of the witches on Brendok. And he's like, oh crap. He, in a relatively short amount of time, goes from Padawan to Knight to Master, and then is like, all right, I'm going to shut my mouth for the next 10 years. Gets deployed to a podunk Jedi temple in the middle of nowhere, takes a vow of silence, and just floats there for years on end.
Communing with the Force, I assume, in a force field bubble. It's very strange.
And it's very clear, especially after rewatching it, that he's literally just running away from his problems. He feels so much guilt over what happened. The death of Master Torben, I thought, was like kind of brutal. It was so like to convince a Jedi to kill himself, I thought was like, wow, that's kind of dark. That's kind of dark, Disney. And the mouse is thinking, ho, yes, we're gonna get dark, Goofy. things are about to get weird. Mickey, no. That was my mini impression. That was bad.
That was bad.
Please cut that.
No. I have the power here.
But I also think it's really cool because we see that he's so strong in the Force that he literally is able to levitate without it doesn't seem like he has to take bathroom breaks to eat or sleep. He's just like gathering energy from the Force. He's able to float, which is a very difficult thing for Jedi to do, is to literally float. Although we see the Stranger, who we literally find out is Chimere later, literally float down in the background and like land. at the end. I want to say it's like episode 4, the episode called Day, where they find that Kelnaka is dead. His entrance in the back shot, like, or the background, so cool. I was like, oh, that was creepy. I love this. This is so cool. But anyway, the Barash Vow, that's a thing that apparently Jedi can take, and they can just commune with the Force forever.
Yeah, that's very interesting, but also, yeah, I think him getting convinced to basically unalive himself was really interesting, because we've been saying for a long time we wish Disney would stop pulling their punches with characters, and that happened in the Acolyte so much. It was so good.
That is, I think, one of the best things about the Acolyte is it's like, hey, we're going to turn up the grit factor like a couple notches. Like, things are going to get a little bit more brutal. When you see the entire team of Jedi encounter Chimere on that planet, whose name I can't really remember right now.
You pronounce it Chimere?
That's because May pronounces it Chimere in one of the episodes.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Because reading it, I thought it was Chimere or even Chimere, like QI, Chi.
Yeah.
Pulling out my Scrabble knowledge. But yeah, I believe it's Chimere.
Okay, Chimere.
Also known as Bortles. We had so much fun in our Patreon Discord server when we were talking about Darth Bortles. Oh my gosh, it was truly like we were like bonding. I was like, this is fun. We're all having like a good time and enjoying the show. Our Patreon server actually is a really positive place for Star Wars fans. I would say we don't have any people in our Discord server who are toxic Star Wars fans. And that's a really good place for us to be.
Which is very surprising, because there's a lot of toxic Star Wars fans.
I don't know that there's a lot of toxic Star Wars fans. It's just the ones that are toxic are just really loud.
For sure.
Because the ones that are happy have no reason to raise their voice above everyone else. You know, it's that bias we're talking about, you know.
Well, we have a podcast, so like we talk about it, but most people, yeah, they're like content with where they're at.
Exactly. We should probably move on to the next point. Let's talk about Cortosis.
All right, guys, I'm going to read an excerpt from Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, and then Andrew's going to talk about Cortosis in a little bit more detail. Impervious to both heat and energy, Cortosis was prized in the construction of armor and shielding by both commercial and military interests, especially with the Galaxy of War. Highly resistant to blaster bolts, Cortosis alloy supposedly could withstand even the blade of a lightsaber.
So that, I believe, is one of the first lore mentions of Cortosis in the books, back again with Path of Destruction. I don't remember the author of that book.
Drew Karpyshyn?
Drew Karpyshyn?
Yeah, I have his books.
Karpyshyn?
I have his books in here somewhere. I actually just moved them around because I, again, switched offices.
He also does a couple of the Mass Effect books, and I think they're very good. They're very good. So if you like the Mass Effect IP, Drew Karpyshyn is a really good author. Anyway, the behavior we see of Chimere's Cortosis armor on lightsaber is not the first instance of Cortosis in the lore, in fact, in canon or legends. In the novel Thrawn Alliances by Timothy Zahn, we see this exact behavior as a top-secret element of the Confederate of Independent Systems, i.e. the Separatists. They were covertly producing B-2 super battle droids with Cortosis woven into their plate armor, amongst other projects as well. On the planet Mokivja, I think I pronounced that correct, Anakin and Padme meet Thrawn for the first time, and for their own reasons, all of them just decide that they cannot stand by while the Cortosis factory still stands. Thrawn being the brain and Anakin being the muscle, they manage to sabotage the factory so that the B-2s never end up being deployed against the Republic, and they're also producing lightsaber-resistant clone trooper armor that Palpatine was secretly having created for Order 66, so that was also destroyed. I mean, Order 66 is still like a sweeping success from the perspective of the Empire, so it didn't really matter, but
wildly successful.
But
even though every time there's a new Star Wars show, you're like, you missed another.
You're like, he didn't get them. But if you think about it, with how many Jedi temples there were, he got like 99.9% of all the Jedi.
Yeah, the fact that like a dozen are left out of thousands, you're like, that's a pretty good eradication rate.
That's a pretty good record.
Well done, sir.
But in that book, we actually see Anakin like try to cut down one of the B2s, and his lightsaber fizzles out, and he's like, "Oh crap!" But I loved that Chimere had a Cortosis helmet, because can you imagine in a lightsaber fight if someone's head is available for you to strike in a lightsaber fight, you're like, yeah, I'm going to end this right now and go for the head. And then when your blade fizzles out on their head, you're like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. So like Chimere having a Cortosis helmet took his greatest vulnerability and turned it into one of his greatest strengths. It's genius. Also, headbutting a lightsaber, cool as so awesome.
So cool. Rule of cool, 10 out of 10. Would highly recommend.
When I saw that, I went, whoa, what did he just do?
It's like magic.
I was like, that was so cool.
And then he proceeds to murder Jedi.
Oh my gosh. I was like, they are all going to die. And then they proceed to all die. That battle, oh my gosh. When he kicks the living out of Yord, I'm like, my feelings on Yord were like kind of halfway, because you like learn to like him, but he's totally like, he's really stiff, he's really stuffy, and he, for lack of a better terms, he's like a cop. He's like, I am a Jedi, I have all this authority, and he behaves like a cop.
Yes.
But you learn to like him as more time goes on, because you get to see his actual personality and some of his backstory, and then to see him just get his neck broken.
A wild kill to do on a Star Wars show.
When my wife and I were watching that, we both went like audible gasped, because it was just like, that has never happened on a Star Wars. Like, they didn't cut away, they're just like, we're not moving the camera, snap, watch the body fall, and we're like, oh Lord. And it's like,
then when Jackie gets 3 hole punched, oh my gosh, brutal.
I think out loud I went, oh no.
He basically stabbed her through both lungs and the spine and was like, yeah, you're dead now.
Oh my gosh.
I've basically hit all of your major organs and central nervous system. You're not getting back up. And also, she's like kind of young. It's like, she's not a child. So there's like certain rules, like you can't depict killing a child on TV, because that's like not okay.
She's a teenager.
She's a teenager. Like, she's implied to be old enough where they're like, we can kill her on screen and it's fine, but also young enough where you're like, oh, that's not good. That's really not good. She was young.
Well, and like Soul was like, you just killed a child. And he was like, you brought her here.
He's like, what did you expect?
He's like, yeah, I'm not taking responsibility for this. Which is just like the entire time, Chimere / Darth Bortles, the whole time he's just like, the Jedi are hypocrites, and I'm just gonna like weave my way into your brain as my lightsaber weaves its way through your heart.
It's nasty.
It's nasty. He was cool, and I hope we see him again. I think we will.
I think we will. And that actually is a great segue, because I have a little bit of a theory as we talk about our next piece of lore, Darth Plagueis. So,
Ooh.
If you didn't know who the weird guy, like stepping out of the shadows with a decrepit hand, like coming out and like grabbing the wall, that was Darth Plagueis. That was the Mune Dark Lord of the Sith that basically taught Sheev Palpatine. So, keep in mind, all we know about Darth Plagueis is in Legends book of the namesake. So it's a relatively boring read, but it does have huge implications for the story. Darth Plagueis was a master to Sheev Palpatine, and we now know that he lives a relatively long life, because the Acolyte happens 100 years before the rise of the Empire, so it's around 100 BBY or thereabouts. Keep in mind, the rule of two needs to still apply, so Chimere and Osha being master and apprentice is no good for him. He, at this point, is probably seeking a master. We can assume that Sheev is not alive at this point, because Sheev is human, and there's nowhere in Star Wars that says that humans have expanded lifespans at this point. So if we say, hey, he's going to live like a standard, like 80, 85 years, because he's pretty old when he's emperor. He's pretty old. If we assume that he's like into his elderly years, then we have to assume that he's not around at this point. So Darth Plagueis is looking for an apprentice. So It is also said in an interview, if we kind of break the fourth wall a little bit, that Manny Jacinto did not know that Plagueis was in the show until it aired.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yes. So personally, I think Plagueis is looking for an apprentice here. I don't think Khmer knows that Plagueis is there. Why would he? Plagueis is the Dark Lord of the Sith. He has no reason to reveal himself. However, if he's taking this opportunity as an observation to say, hey, there is a potential rival or potential apprentice working and trying to train his own, I feel like that's some good reconnaissance for him to do. So I think Plagueis is looking for an apprentice. He notices that Khmer and Osha are now going to basically be training together. And so I think if we have a season 2, here's my theory, that Khmer and Osha are going to at some point have to contend to see who is going to be the apprentice of Darth Plagueis.
So I guess that's actually an assumption that I made that is never actually confirmed by the show. I assumed that Khmer is the apprentice to Darth Plagueis. I'm assuming that.
Now, see, it's not confirmed either way, but Manny Jacinto not knowing that Plagueis was even there, I feel like is a little bit of a nod to him, to his character, Khmer, not knowing that Darth Plagueis was involved in the show. Because he's looking for his own apprentice or acolyte. Like, he actively states, like, I just want to train and exist like an apprentice.
Right.
And he wouldn't be doing that if he was already involved with the Rule of Two, because that's like a big no-no.
And fallen Jedi are like the cream of the crop as far as Sith apprentices go. That's how in the Dynasty of Evil book, also written by Drew Karpyshyn, which is about, the development of the Rule of Two and Darth Bane, the person Darth Bane picks as his apprentice when he thinks that Darth Zana is no longer worthy to be his apprentice is a fallen Jedi. So
they are quite helpful.
So that's interesting because, yeah, I went the entire show assuming that he was the apprentice because he's so young. Huh.
So potentially we don't know yet. So again, we might have to wait until season 2 if they ever make a season 2 with the like how the Acolyte was received. I don't actually know if we're going to get to tell out this story, but also like Disney's going to make money on Star Wars stuff kind of regardless. So,
I mean, I just hope that at this point, I just need answers.
Yes. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Force psychometry, which is also known in the show as like echoes in the Force.
Yeah.
Psychometry is actually like a really common, like fantastical, magical power. It's basically the ability of a wizard in fantasy or a Jedi in Star Wars to touch an item and then learn something of its past. That's like a pretty common thing we see. It's a rare power, but it's seen in a lot of different IPs. So keep that in mind. So, introduced into Star Wars, into the canon in the Clone Wars, a Jedi with psychometry can touch an object and see into the past of an object. We first see Quinlan Vos use this ability to track down Zero the Hutt, and we also see Ahsoka sense these echoes in the Force on the destroyed map of Peridia. Few instances of psychometry being used, and we get to see that a little bit more with Vernestra Rowe. She has the ability as well. And this is, as far as the wiki reads, this is an ability you have to be born with, not an ability you can cultivate. That also being said, it's unclear where Ahsoka gets the ability or when she learns she has the ability. That's fucking gross. Anyways, it's unclear when Ahsoka learns that she has this ability and also how it activates, because I don't necessarily know if we see her using it in the Clone Wars, because it's said that they can kind of use this ability on any object. So very unclear on how that plays itself out, but that's all right. That's where we're at with Force psychometry.
It's a cool ability, and it basically is the way the story is driven in the Jedi Fallen Order games. It's like you have to be able to sense these Force echoes to play the game.
Indeed.
It would be like if Cal Kestis didn't have the ability of Force psychometry, it would be like, what's this thing? Roll credits, directed by George Lucas. That would be it. I have very little lore about this next part, other than these things exist in the Star Wars universe and they're cool. So in the show, we saw a couple of different lightsaber forms, including detachable lightsabers and lightsaber whips. So the detachable lightsabers from Chimere, that is a really interesting style because it is one saber. He literally just splits it in half and now it's two, which means he has to have 2 lightsaber crystals in that thing, right?
Yes.
He would have to. So at some point, he's bled 2 lightsaber crystals and is able to, unhinge them at will. It's interesting to me that he still chose to keep them in a single hilt style and not just flip it around and make a double-bladed lightsaber. Probably because his whole style of fighting is like deception and subterfuge and like lulling people into a sense of security. And then especially like what we see in Jecki when she gets 3-hole punched, he basically copies her thing when she starts dual wielding, disarms one of her lightsabers, and then she attacks her. She thinks that she's on level ground, and then he's like, no, I've actually lured you into a trap, and now you're dead. Stab, stab, stab. Goodbye.
Yep.
Lightsaber whips. This is an issue I have with the show. Not that lightsaber whips are stupid or that they messed up the lore, but we see one instance of the lightsaber whip being used?
Huge waste.
Huge waste. Also, what a tease. Are you guys kidding me? They were like, we're showing off the lightsaber whip in the trailer, and that was literally it. That was literally just her cutting a bug in half. We don't actually see Vernestra and Chimere fight because they know each other, because he is what we're assuming is a fallen Jedi, because Yord knows him. He's like, I know you, snap. And then Vernestra is able to sense him like right away. I'm almost thinking, was Chimere Vernestra's Padawan at one point? Because Vernestra does have at least one recorded Padawan before this. I don't remember his name, but he actually gets caught behind the Nihil storm wall in the books, and they try to rescue him, and he actually chooses to stay behind. That's as far as I've gotten in the books, so if you know what happens, zip your lip.
I'm not caught up on the High Republic at all, so that's going to take a while.
All these words just make no sense. Like, what the hell is he talking about?
We did a couple episodes on the High Republic, guys. Go back and listen to those. It would be super helpful. It's not required reading, but it's optional.
But I think those episodes don't even catch up to where the current lore is on what the Nihil are doing, because they've essentially created their own version of the Cicatrix Maledictum, or the Great Rift, like we see in 40K, and have literally split the galaxy in half. Like, if people try to travel across the storm wall in Star Wars, their ships are either dumped back into real space right away or ripped to pieces.
It only took 40 minutes for us to reference 40K, guys. Very nice.
40K in 40 minutes!
Play on Tabletop. We would like to sponsor, please. Huge fans, actually. So, yeah, lots of cool lightsabers. I'm a huge fan when they introduce new weapons and armor. I really like making videos about that kind of stuff. I think it's super fun. So excited, but also, yeah, same thing. I think that was a huge waste. Although the choreography with a lightsaber whip against a lightsaber probably would have been pretty crazy. However, they should have just gone for it.
They should have. The budget for the Acolyte was astronomical, and I'm pressing X to doubt in this moment, because I'm like, you guys couldn't fit that in. You couldn't fit that in.
Ooh, do you want to hear an interesting production fact that I learned this week?
Yes, I do.
So an interesting production fact. Do you remember back to, let's say, Revenge of the Sith, where Obi-Wan and Anakin are fighting? They move their lightsabers very, very quick, right? If you look at these stunt models for those are handles with basically steel rods or plastic rods coming out of them. They're very thin. They're very light. They can swing those things super quick, really, really quick, which is why we get those high action intensity scenes. Then what we get in the new movies, which one of the things people said is, why are they moving so slow with the lightsabers? If you look at the newest 3 movies, you'll realize that, man, they really are not moving as quick, because Andrew, you've got a lightsaber in hand. They used something similar to a stunt saber. Now, the reason they switched over to these heavier options is exactly what Andrew's showing off right now, is the glow effect. It's for lighting purposes. So they used heavier lightsabers, which I think they were rated at being 5 or 6 times heavier. So that's why they're so hard to swing around. at quick speeds. When you're
Yeah.
seeing Kylo and Rey fight, you're like, guys, this is like kind of slow. What's up with this? It's because they're using a different stunt saber. Better visual effects, but slower choreography. So that is actually one of the main differences. And I saw that, I think, on like a YouTube short earlier this week. So that is my understanding.
But they're still moving.
They're still moving really quickly, yes. But like not as fast as lightsaber combat in the prequel trilogy.
But faster than what we saw in the sequel trilogy.
The original trilogy?
Sequel. Because the sequels, I felt like their lightsaber combat was very like slow and methodical. Like Kylo Ren's lightsaber strategy.
That's what I said earlier. You missed that part.
Yeah, I'm agreeing.
Oh, you were taking your headphones off, so I don't know if you were actually listening or not.
Yeah, I had one ear still on. I heard you.
Okay, so yeah, fun fact. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about...
Quick segue. This is the kind of lightsaber that we're going to be giving away for our lightsaber giveaway.
Nice. Excellent. I'm very excited for that.
I'm excited. I'm so excited. I told one of my nerd coworkers, I was like, I bought some lightsabers, and he's like, what? I was like, yeah, I bought some stunt sabers. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, they're machined aluminum hilts with polycarbonate blades, so you can beat the crap out of each other.
They're pretty strong.
And we're going to give them away on our podcast. And he's like, that's so cool.
We're very excited about it.
It is cool. It's cool as hell. I'm just saying.
And then coming up next, we're going to talk about Force witches and Force cults. Andrew, tell us a little bit more about this.
I think the witches are awesome, and I think Sith sorcery specifically is some of the coolest and creepiest Sith magic. For example, Darth Xana in the Darth Bane trilogy. I love those books. You guys should really read them. We're going to mention them a lot probably on this podcast. And she has this ability to cause like terrifying hallucinations in the people she fights, literally to the point where they just go crazy and almost die. Like their hearts will stop. They're in so much fear. However, the witches we see on... in the Acolyte, they're chanting, kind of dumb. Hate to say it. It's kind of dumb.
It was a creative choice that not everyone got behind.
This is one of the things from the show that I definitely was like, y'all are making it really hard to defend you. Because their whole, the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. I was like, that's dumb. I don't like that. Because it just didn't hit. I totally understand that a cool chant can be really cool, but this wasn't it. I don't really know what to offer up as a way to fix the chanting being kind of dumb either. I think it could have been way creepier, really kind of lean into the witch aspect, maybe even have some witches start floating as like the ceremony progresses, almost like they're being possessed by the dark side. I think the music should have turned the reverb up to like 11, make the atmosphere of the audience feel like the dark side is really permeating the very air, entrapping the witches in a bubble of dark side energy where the whispers of like departed sisters snake through the crowd and into the ears of May and Osha. And the whole black eyes thing, lean into that. That was creepy as hell. Do more of that. So there's definitely some things that they could have done a lot better. Honestly, for that specific scene, they probably should have gotten a horror movie director to at least advise, to say, hey, we're trying to do something creepy. Can you help us with this?
Yeah, they needed to turn that up to 11.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like that specific scene was outside of their creative abilities. Wow, that sounds harsh. Anyway, it seemed like the witches were, for the most part, minding their own business, though, and the Jedi kind of come off as like these rigid or even bigots because like they're unable to understand how the witches could use the Force in a different way. And I mean, calling them witches, and the witches also call themselves witches, is like, it has a terrible connotation. I think if the creep factor had been turned up to 11, however, the Jedi would have been a little bit more justified from their perspective when because they gave into their fear and prejudice. And that's how the Coven died, because they're like, they treated the witches as enemies from the moment they met them. And that's how things went sideways, because the witches were, for lack of a better terms, defending their homes, defending their children. And the Jedi were like, hey, we want to take your children. But wait, why are you being aggressive? We just want to take your children. It's like, yeah, no wonder they wanted to kill you. Are you kidding me? Threaten someone's child? That is the fastest way for things to go sideways. Yeah,
in spectacular fashion.
it's the Jedi they're so like blinded by their own hubris in this moment where they're like, we have the right to test your children. It's like, says who? They're like, says us.
Says the Republic. The laws we made say we have the right to do this, and they're like, ah, damn.
Yeah, they're like, no wonder they're like hiding from you on a planet that's not in the Republic, mind you. So they're outside of their jurisdiction, but they're like, what are you gonna do? Like, it's a really good example of the Jedi misusing their power. Anyway,
Absolutely. Coming up next, we're going to talk about lightsaber bleeds. Andrew, tell us more about that.
this is one of the subjects that really had the internet in a Twitter, for lack of a better words.
You have a lot of notes on this.
I have a lot of notes on this. People got
Holy hell.
really upset about the lightsaber bleeds, and I kind of want to de-escalate the situation a little bit. So I have a lot of words, so we'll talk.
Okay.
Let's lubricate my throat muscles. Sweet Coke Zero, not a sponsor. There were a lot of lore bits in the Acolyte that the more obsessed fans, us included, noticed and maybe got real upset. So now we have to talk about things that maybe don't matter as much, like Coyote-Mundi's age. My official take, I don't really care that they retconned Coyote-Mundi's age. Like, he used to be not that old, now he's literally hundreds of years old. In the end, he's like a minor character at best. Why does it really matter how old he is? Lore gets retconned all the time, and it's kind of an obscure fact that we know his age at all. However, to speak from the opposite side, this is a slippery slope, because this is a minor example of lore changes that affected the story as a whole, but there are other instances where it's been much more impactful, like, for example, the Holdo maneuver. Super cool, but really, really overpowered. I had a really positive theater experience with this scene because several people in the theater were like, oh my God! Like, fast forward to the next movie, episode 9, the writers do literally nothing to explain why the Rebel Alliance can't just turn every fighter into a kinetic kill vehicle. I think it's the guy who plays Pippin basically says, oh, that's a 1 in a million shot. And it's one of the actors who plays one of the hobbits. He says in
Pippin? Oh, he's in that? Oh.
The Rise of Skywalker, there's no way we can do the Holdo maneuver. It was a 1 in a million shot. And then they move on. That was the lore explanation why we can't just keep doing that. It doesn't feel great as a fan to be like, hey, can you spend the time explaining to us why this thing isn't common? Because then the High Republic introduced the hyperspace disaster, which essentially is the same thing. It turned the Legacy Run, which was a shipping ship, and turned it into a kinetic kill vessel, and it destroyed like a bunch of planets. It was very bad. So it's something that's happened in the lore now more than once, but yet
it was very bad. And in the Great Hyperspace Disaster, I think that's a good explanation of why that shouldn't be used, because it's so unpredictable and you can't, once you fired it, you can't control it. So it's like something that everyone agrees, like, oh, we're not going to do this because like this could have ramifications for multiple systems all in the path of these objects.
And that's a great reason. I totally agree with you, but I wanted to hear it from the mouth of someone in the movie to say,
I know, we shouldn't have to explain away the inconsistencies. The movie should.
Yes, agreed. It's bad writing, and it's not fair to the fans. Take time to explain things to your fans and help them immerse them into your universe. What does that have to do with lightsaber bleeds? Let's talk about it. We're going to talk about bleeding lightsaber crystals and the rule of cool. I saw a guy online who took exception to the fact that Osha bleeding her lightsaber crystal was unrealistic because in the comics, he cited that it was super difficult for someone as powerful as Darth Vader to bleed his own lightsaber crystal. And I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit. I was like, well, that's not really a fair comparison because it doesn't take into account that Vader's story and Osha's story are completely separate events. And I'll explain what I mean, and I'll explain why I think that matters. In the comics, Vader travels to Mustafar where there's a force nexus and he uses that to bleed his lightsaber crystal. And in the comic, it's extremely difficult for him. The thing is, it doesn't matter how hard it was for Osha, because in order to write an engaging and thrilling story, the author had to show Vader struggling to bleed his lightsaber crystal in order to showcase him overcoming the challenge. It was never about just the act itself. It was building the story and building the character and power level of Vader. It was never about, oh, well, Osha did it, so it should be easy for Vader. No, that's missing the point. Can you imagine if in the comic, which was written before the Acolyte, so obviously the order of events is wrong, but in the comic, if Vader had been like, oh, well, it was super easy for this one, like, super young kid, well, she's not a kid, she's a young adult, to bleed her lightsaber crystal, I should be able to do it no problem, and it takes up one comic frame, people would ask for their money back because that's a dumb story. He's like, yeah, it's like super easy because I'm like super strong. It's like, that's not fun. To show Vader struggling to perform this act, it shows how powerful Vader is, and that's the point. Like, you can't, like, you have to have your characters struggle or go through trauma and to build their character. It's not about like, oh, there's a set difficulty level on bleeding a lightsaber crystal. That is not the, I hope that makes sense. Vader is one of the most powerful beings in the universe, and at this point, the narrative demanded that he struggle with this task. As for Osha bleeding the lightsaber crystal, I think in her case, we can cite the rule of cool being the reason she is able to perform the lightsaber bleed. She finally acknowledged her pain and hate, gives into the dark side, and immediately murders her old master, steals his lightsaber, and corrupts it for her own use. That's cool as hell.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, like, Vader's story, it doesn't matter in this instance. It doesn't matter that Vader had to go through his own gauntlet to bleed a lightsaber crystal. The rule of cool trumps what I would call a strict adherence to lore, which in this case is, this is how difficult it is to bleed a lightsaber crystal, which I think we need to let that go. Like, I think it's going to be difficult for every character to bleed a lightsaber crystal no matter what.
But also each Sith or dark side user is going to have their own journey to changing their lights, to corrupting their own lightsaber crystal.
Yes. And changing lightsaber crystal colors is in the lore because Ahsoka does it multiple times. Like, we see her lightsaber colors go from green to like a slightly different shade of green, and I think at one point they're like green and yellow, and then she moves to blue because Anakin gives her the lightsabers, and we maybe assume that Anakin either just borrowed those lightsabers or got the crystals himself, which at that point his crystal was blue, so any lightsaber he made would also have blue crystals. So she has blue crystals, but then as she makes her own lightsabers in the Imperial era, they're white because the lightsaber crystal mimics the personality and the state of the user. It bonds with them, and it does have the ability to change color over time. That didn't used to be a lore fact, and that has since changed in the relatively recent past. Lore, I might add, is a fluid thing, and those of us who regularly visit Wikipedia in our free time could probably relax about a few things. Lore is always changing. It used to be that red crystals were synthetic, and people were pretty pissed off about that change too. So they weren't even real kyber crystals. They were synthetically made kyber crystals via Sith sorcery. So it wasn't corrupted. It just was, for lack of better terms, fake or synthetic. Yeah, that's probably they're artificial. And here's the thing. We can't let outrage dictate how we interact with the world. For the fans who are more entrenched in the lore, like we are, for the sake of the fandom as a whole, it probably would be for the best if we collectively took the stick out of our own asses. Being less insane about the details of Star Wars lore has been a very healthy choice for me personally. I'm talking intentionally choosing to care less about the minute details of every little thing that happens on screen and just trying to enjoy things. If I'm being honest, it was an elitist perspective, and stepping away from that has allowed me to actually enjoy the IP more that I've grown up to love so much. Anyway, I've discussed a lot of topics. I hope that all makes sense. Like, we're just trying to say lore is important. I get that. it is important to how you tell a story, but it shouldn't be held so tightly that it doesn't let new ideas in. Because, yes, new ideas are what's going to keep Star Wars fresh. And I think at the end of the day, that is what the fandom needs and wants, is fresh material.
Absolutely. Our last bit of lore is going to be about a vergence in the Force. Now, Andrew had mentioned that there was a vergence in the Force over on Mustafar. We're going to assume that there was another one over on, what was the planet that they were on? Brendok, thank you. We're not entirely sure if there was even a vergence in the Force over on Tatooine, aka Anakin's birthplace. So there's no precedent for this in the lore. There's basically Force-sensitive areas in the universe, and you just have to go find them. Very similar to the planet that Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka visit when they find the brother, sister,
Mortis.
and father. Mortis. Thank you.
Which is a terrifying name for a planet.
Although, super cool.
Oh, it means death in Latin?
Yes. So the fact that there's a vergence in the Force on Brendok, I think is like, that's fine. Tells a good story. I love your notes here. The twins chanting really creeps me out and is really awkward. And every time I see it, I think, I wish you weren't so awkward, but twins are abnormal as it is. We don't need help reinforcing that stereotype. Case in point, us. So we see vergence in the Force. Basically, like, cool things can happen around these areas. That's like, just think of, like, there's more Force around for you to tap into. We don't know that much about it because there's different and weird events that happen in all of these areas. All right, guys. So for our Nerddom news, we are going to just talk a little bit about Star Wars Outlaws today. Episode's running long, so we're going to keep this short and sweet. Andrew, give us some news about Outlaws, please.
So recently, Ubisoft actually released a 10-minute gameplay through IGN of Star Wars Outlaws, where they went and they Kay Vess, the main character, goes on a side quest to retrieve a Sarlacc tooth out of the inside of a dead Sarlacc. However, people didn't respond to this video very favorably, not because of the merit of the side quest, but because graphically the video didn't look very good. The video had, I want to say, like, at the time, like 70% dislikes to 30% likes. People hated it. It looked pretty bad in some places. However, there's been other gameplay snippets that have been released since then and before then that look better. So I'm not 100% sure why Ubisoft released this one and it made it look so bad. It's hard to say. But I think this is going to still have a negative impact on people playing Outlaws Day 1. However, this is not going to affect our decision to play Outlaws Day 1. We will be playing it on release, on stream for you guys. We're going to take the risk. I think, however, this does affect whether or not I'm going to buy the season pass for the podcast. So with the unfavorable response of this video, it is not affecting our decision to buy the game Day 1. We're not pre-ordering it because, honestly, I think both of us feel that we've been hurt too many times, and pre-ordering is just not in the cards for us. You get hurt enough, and it's like, okay, I can just buy it Day 1. I'll lose out on the tiny little extras you offer for pre-order, which, in my opinion, are never worth it. People are like, oh, you get the game 2 days early. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah, that's not...
It's like, I probably wasn't going to be able to play those days anyway because I'm at work.
Not worth it. Yeah, it's like a Wednesday and a Thursday. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. I'm like, it wasn't going to work out. However, originally I was going to buy the season pass bundle with the game, and I don't think I'm going to do that now. I think I'm going to wait to see how the base game plays out before I spend money on the season pass. And I'll buy it separately. Will it cost me more? Probably. But I'm not going to invest in something that, honestly, it's my confidence has been a little undermined by this video. There are some parts of it that don't look great. I anticipate that we're going to probably get a Day 1 patch of some sort. The game has gone gold at this point, so they are saying like, hey, like, the game is done. I'm like, okay, is it though?
Right.
And the thing is I'm stoked for this. I'm stoked for this game, but I'm just going to take the chance. I wish buying a video game didn't have to be a risk based decision. I wish I could just see something and be like, yeah, I bet that's going to rock. And it does. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm happy I paid, however much money for it, which is now what, $70 plus Washington sales tax of 10%, $77. Oh my gosh.
Woo!
Inflation keeps going up and my paychecks stay the same.
It's a rough one.
Anyway, so at this point, when this video comes out, it will be almost exactly a month until Star Wars Outlaws is going to be released. We will be playing it on stream, just letting you guys know. We just won't have access to the new Jabba the Hutt quest line that the season pass comes with, or whatever DLC comes with that. If the base game is good, we'll get the season pass for you guys so you can see.
Absolutely. All right, guys, with that, we'd like to throw out a huge thank you to all of our patrons, Mike, Isaac, and David, and Calm Brew, all of our biggest supporters. And guys, thank you so much for continuing to support us. Keep in mind, guys, for just $5 a month, you can support us here over at Talk About Tatooine, so we can keep doing awesome things like gaming events, giveaways, and higher quality content. Your support is how we keep this up here, guys. Software ain't free, and we really appreciate it. Discord access is granted to all patrons for your life. So even if you only need support for 1 month, you do get access to our wonderful community over on Discord. We would really ask you guys to make sure that you guys do that. If for some reason you find yourself in a position where you can't support us on Patreon, guys, subscribe to the channel and watch our videos. That helps us out so much, because we don't get ad revenue from any of this stuff, but we are hoping to hit those milestones over on YouTube so we can start making a little bit extra money and we can put it right back into the show. Thank you guys all so much. Every single one of you guys watching is amazing. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.